Hey guys, it's the Chad, your C10 truck nerd. Well, if you guys haven't had the pleasure of sticking your head up under the dash panel of one of these old trucks, you're sure missing out. Somehow GM was able to cram in all sorts of wires, ducts, hoses, and other doodads right up here under the dash. Well, at some point you're going to have a part that fails and you're going to need to know how to get to it. So in today's video, I decided I'd go through and show you guys how to remove and install the instrument cluster. If you guys have a 67 to 72 Chevy or GMC truck, you need to start learning how to work on it and definitely how to pull out one of these instrument panels. At some point, you're going to have a bulb, a hose, a wire, or even a switch fail on the backside of the dash, and you need to know how to get to it. What I've learned over all these years of working on these trucks is spending a few extra minutes to pull a glove box liner or the instrument cluster out is definitely worth it. That way you don't have to work by feel. You don't come out with so many bloody knuckles, and I tend to just cuss less. Now these old trucks were pretty basic, and pulling one of these instrument clusters out isn't that bad as long as you know what you're doing. But there's too many guys out there like me in the past that have just guessed, and we break a lot of stuff. Well, I can't afford to go through and buy a brand new instrument cluster because they're going of upwards of $500 right now. I mean, I don't usually even spend that much money on an entire truck, so don't break them. Now, the instrument clusters were pretty universal on the trucks, Suburbans, K5 Blazers, and Jimmys over this 6-year period. Now, they either would have been a 3-hole or a 7-hole flavor, depending on which gauge options the truck came with. Now, they were held into the front side of the dash with 6 perimeter screws. They would have had some knobs and some decorative bezels. On the back side, they would have been held in with the speedometer cable, electric plug, and potentially an oil pressure line and tachometer. Now the tools you're going to need to remove one of these are pretty simple. All it would be is a Phillips head screwdriver, a flat blade pocket screwdriver, a 5/16 either line wrench or opened end wrench, and a small pair of pliers. So once you get all those gathered up, we can get to work. Before we can take out one of these instrument clusters, we're going to have to pull the headlight rod, the wiper knob, and if your truck was equipped with a manual choke or throttle, those knobs need to come out too. With any type of electrical work that I'm doing, I think it's always the safest to disconnect the battery. To get this headlight rod out, you actually have to pull the rod all the way back to the on position, which is running your headlights constantly. So if you don't want to drain your battery or run the risk of a short, just go ahead and disconnect it now. So first we're going to remove the headlight rod. To do that, pull the headlights out all the way to the on position, and then we're going to have to reach up under the dash and feel around on the top of the switch for this release button. Once we depress that release button, you should be able to go through and pull the rest of the rod right on out. Now your headlights are going to be on all the time unless you disconnect the battery. Now to get the decorative bezel out, I just take my small pair of needle nose pliers and stick it in these 2 small grooves and spin it counterclockwise. Next, we're going to move over to the wiper knob. Depending on the year of the truck, this could have been on the top left in 67, 68, and it would have been on the top right, 69 to 72. This one doesn't have a rod. What it actually has is a set screw on the bottom side of the knob itself. So this is where you need your flat blade pocket screwdriver. Come underneath the bottom, and you're actually going to just loosen it up. You don't need to take the set screw all the way out and pull it straight off. You can see that set screw there. It's also a great time to go through and inspect the back side of the knob itself. These can get wallered all out. Should have a flat spot right here towards the top. If it is wallered out, just go ahead and buy a new one. If not, set it aside and we can reuse it. Then, same as before, grab your small needle nose pliers, spin that bezel off, and put it aside. If your truck was equipped with a manual throttle, you'd have a knob just like the washers, where you'd have a set screw that you remove out. If you had a manual throttle, the way this one would work is you would actually pull the throttle out a little ways, lock down a pair of pliers here, and spin the actual knob off of the choke rod. So once you guys get all the knobs and decorative bezels off, the only thing holding the cluster into the front side of the dash would be the 6 perimeter screws. To get those out, just grab your Phillips head screwdriver and take them out. Now once you get the 6 screws out, there shouldn't be anything really holding the cluster into the front side of the dash other than maybe this steering grommet that slides around the column and underneath the actual cluster itself. If that is in the way, just slide it towards you, towards the steering wheel. And the only thing now holding the cluster in would be on the back side of the dash. And that would be our electrical plug, our speedo cable, and if your truck was equipped, it could have had this oil pressure line and potentially a tachometer or a vacuum. There could be all sorts of aftermarket stuff somebody's put in these trucks as well. So to gain access, first, we're gonna have to reach our hand back up under the dash again to get to the speedo cable. And it should only be in there hand tight, but you might need a pair of pliers to back it off. Once you get that disconnected, you should be able to pull the cluster towards you a little bit, and now you can see the oil pressure line. This is where we're going to grab our 5/16 inch wrench. If you have the line wrench, it's better, but a box wrench will be fine too. And we're going to go through and start to loosen this up. Now, I definitely think it's a good idea to have a rag or some paper towels. That way you don't get any oil drips on your nice carpet or your completely rusted out floor like this one. And we'll go ahead and back it off. This thing's a booger. So once you get the oil pressure line removed, you should be able to pull the cluster out far enough to gain access to the electrical plug. And the way it works, it just has 2 prongs on each side. You squeeze them together, kind of wiggle them out, and the cluster should come out now. It may be a little bit snug with your dash panel here, and sometimes you actually have to drop the steering column. There's a couple bolts here at the bottom. If you loosen it up, that's usually enough room to wiggle this right on out. And that's it. Oh yeah, one more thing. I forgot this truck steering column's been replaced with a newer one. But if you guys have removed everything that I've talked about so far and it still doesn't seem like the cluster wants to come out of the dash, what it may be on an automatic truck is you have this line or a fiber optic line that runs right here next to the speedo up the steering column shaft. What it's doing is, that's what illuminates the gear shift indicator on an automatic column. So to remove that, all you do is just turn the plug. It's just one of your light bulb connections. You can just leave it laying loose here in the dash until you go to reinstall it. Well, now that we have the instrument cluster completely out, you can go through and do any type of repairs to it, and the dash is wide open. So now you can go through and change any bulbs, switches, or do any type of maintenance to the parts that you've just been neglecting for years because it's just too hard to get to. Now, if you guys aren't real familiar with all the parts underneath the dash panels of these trucks, check out my other videos on how to swap out the wiper motors, all the knobs and switches, and even the dash pads. To reinstall the cluster, I do things kind of in the reverse order, but I always like starting with the electrical connector because it has the most slack. So I'll go through and make the connection. Some guys can try to hook the speedo up. My hand won't fit in there. So I'm loosely gonna slide it back into the dash and then connect the speedo wire. Speedo cable, how about that? Again, this just needs to be hand tight. You don't have to use pliers. Once you get that done, just pull the dash back out a little bit. And I'm gonna go through and connect my oil pressure line. Just make sure you don't cross thread it trying to get it in there. All right. Once you get that in, slide it all the way back into the panel. Now I'll just grab a couple screws to hold it in place. Once I've got a couple screws in place, I'll go through and grab my decorative bezels. Get your needle nose pliers, tighten both of those up, or however many you have. And you can go back and put your wiper knob on. Make sure the flat part coincides with the flat part on the wiper switch. And you can grab your headlight rod, slide it back in, and then tighten in the rest of your Phillips head screws. And then you can slide your steering column grommet back down underneath the cluster as well. Once you get all those things in, make sure you reconnect the battery and you're good to go. So now you guys have seen how to remove and install the instrument clusters on a 67 to 72. If you guys know of any other cool tips and tricks about getting these things out, well, type it down the old clickety-clack, and while you're there, hit that like button and subscribe. You guys don't want to miss out on these highly motivational and somewhat educational videos that I make. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.